I think let's directly jump over to our today's session. And before we move over to the today's session, let me share with you about something about the yesterday one, because yesterday's session was very interesting. We talked about how companies can monetize their patents without going after their competitors and still make a lot of money out of it. So it was a very interesting session. We had more than 100 people, registered for it, and now we are back to back. Coming over with another interesting topic, and we want to talk about those things which a lot of people completely ignore, and that is about talking about monetization hacks. That means how you can make money or how you can license your patents without spending a lot of money on hiring other companies or hiring consultants or brokers or any of the other type of things which a lot of high-end guys will talk about. So here, before talking about or before deciding this topic, a lot of my team members were saying that this would be very relevant for small and medium-sized companies because they don't have a lot of money to spend on licensing, and they want to go with this approach. But based on my experience, I found it completely opposite. I found that a lot of large companies using this strategy, but the small companies not doing it. That means there's a lot to learn that how intelligently the large companies are using such kind of strategies where they don't need to spend any money and they are able to license a lot of their patents. So before we go ahead and talk about these different strategies, which have been more or less collation of our experience of working with a lot of different type of companies based out of US, Europe, China, and majorly where we were involved in contributing towards their licensing strategy. So I would also like all of to introduce Vikas to all of you. So I have with me Vikas in today's session. Vikas has been working in building new solutions, I would say the new IP solutions for large companies, small and medium-sized companies, universities and funding agencies, so all different types of, you can say, entities that are involved in patents and their licenses. So I thought that would be good to actually have some live examples when we are talking about the different strategies based on what he has identified when he has when he might have had a discussion with IP councils or technology transfer offices or licensing executives. So Vikas, you're welcome for this particular webinar.
Thanks, Deepak. Good to be here.
Okay, so so without waiting, let's move on and talk about let's move to the first strategy. So we are going to talk about the first strategy, which is in a very simplified form, but this is how we have figured out a lot of people getting a very quick idea about who are the ones which might be highly likely using their technology. So here we have provided one example. So the example here is all about if you have your patent, how you can figure it out the assignees or the companies that might be licensing your technology. So if you closely follow the forward assignees, for example, here we have talked about a patent. For example, the patent is assigned to Headwater Partners. That means, let's suppose you are one of the part of Headwater Partners. So if you look at all the forward citations of your patent, and see that how many times these companies might be citing your technology, this gives a very good idea about that they are building their technology over and above the patent that you have. So if you're talking about the type of companies that are highly likely, then this gives a very good idea about that who could be the first contenders. Now here this is about the large companies, but sometimes you can also identify the companies which may not be too large and would be very open to license the technology from you or directly buy it. So this was a very basic thing. So I'm going to quickly pass over to the next strategy, which I would which I have seen a lot of very mature IP departments also struggle to actually execute, which is about how to form pools which allows you to not just license the technology to one company, but make sure that all the future companies that might be coming into your technology domain have to license from you. So before I go into the strategy, let me bring in Vikas here and ask him that has he actually worked with some of the clients or some of the companies in suggesting them that how they can form the pools, and what are the pros and cons, or what are the best things that they should take care of if they are going ahead with such a strategy. So Vikas, what do you think about formation of pools?
Thanks, Deepak. And I think formation of pools is an idea which has been researched upon a lot in the past. And then based on my conversations with some of our clients, I have some insights. And one of the insights was that there are a lot of pools related to standards like 3GPP or organizations like ETSI organizing the patents of Ericsson or Nokia or Docomo, so on and so forth. So this is an area which is already saturated. The standards related pools, they are in plenty. But what about the non-standard patents that are there? And then those are the patents that actually lie on your table for a long time without you thinking about their licensing. Now, one of the examples that you see on the screen is location-based services pool. And then what we are trying to show here is that which can be the large players, which can be the individual inventors, and then which can be the small and medium-sized players that can contribute to a non-standard pool. Now, non-standard pools, even though they are not as hyped about as the standard-related pool, but they are very important to players, say, for example, who is in China and who is looking to actually enter the US market or the European market. Now, so it presents a win-win situation for both the parties. So companies from China who would like to actually sell their products in US or Europe, they can actually come to a single place for shopping for technologies that may give them an entry into the US and the Europe market. And the advantage for other players, say, for example, players like AT&T or IBM, who files thousands of patents per year, and then there are a lot of patents that are just lying on the shelf. Those can be used to actually gain licensing revenues. It can be a win-win situation for even individual inventors who are prolifically inventing in non-standard technologies, and then they get a chance to actually gain fair licensing revenues from such kind of arrangements. So I believe this is one of the major areas where less investment and more of collaboration can be done by identifying players, individual inventors, small and medium-sized companies, and even competitors to work together to actually create something that can earn a lot in revenues as well as save a lot of dollars for you.
I think because that's a very interesting point, because there have been a lot been written about the pools and what are the advantage of it. But I figured out that the key point here is collaboration that you mentioned, and I think a lot of small and medium-sized companies are can do it more effectively. That if they can get together with some of the other players which are of the same type, and they get together, maybe if they have an IP council or the licensing manager, if his objective can become collaborating with the other IP councils and bring them all into one table, maybe 3 or 4 companies, all of small size. Let's forget about the large companies like Google, Motorola, or IBM. Let's talk about only the small ones. If those 3 or 4 can get together, I think they all can get benefit out of such forming a private pool, because this can prevent all the new companies to enter into the domain, or actually, I would say, rather than saying prevent, pay money to such kind of pool and license the patents from these companies. So it's like if you alone cannot fight, you should get together and license the patent as a whole, which is like a win-win for everyone. So I think this private pool is a great thing. The only thing is that you would need to spend some time, individual time, to bring a very good coordination between between your competitors. I've also seen that sometimes the pool being formed not with the competitors, but with your vendors. So every company has some vendors from where they get their supplies or maybe the materials. And sometimes they also provide their output to the other set of companies. It's kind of value chain. And I've seen that if some of these, you can make a collaboration with your vendors that are there in the life cycle, you again is able to form a very strong entity which indirectly makes the other vendors who may be working with you, but also make them license the patents from you, because you together make a very strong entity. So here I think if you spend some of your energy, maybe 2 hours every week, I'm sure that very good return can be taken out of it. So this was all about the pool. So before we move forward, I think I would share this with all of you, that at any point of time, if you have any questions, you can just directly write it in the question sections. That you may find that question section on the right hand side of the GoToWebinar control panel that might be there on your screen, or you can also directly type it in the chat panel that is there. So we are going to take all of those questions in the end, or you can also email us later. So let's go to the next type of strategy, and I think this is more interesting than the one that we have talked about. What I have seen is that when we talk about licensing, the first thing that a lot of clients or a lot of companies actually think about, that who is using our technology. And we have seen that rather than talking about who is using our technology, if we figure out that who needs our technology, it completely changed the level in which you are playing. So it is about, if you can figure out the type of companies who are trying to solve the same problem that your patent solves, it is highly likely that you can license your technology to the other company. So here, I think let's talk about one example that we have mentioned. So because, can you share about what you wanted to convey with this example, and how, an individual who may have access to maybe just Google patent, can he do this kind of analysis? Because I can see something like an Excel sheet snapshot that you have included, and a lot of like yes, no type of problem. How can this one individual can do this and can identify the leads which would like to license these patents that have been mentioned?
Sure, Deepak. Thanks. And then let me first paint a high-level picture of what this exercise is all about. So if you want to first understand companies who are solving similar problems as yours, the best thing to do is to keep a watch on some of the like players like you, who may be large, medium, or small. Now, the idea is to actually look at their most recent grantings or applications, and then try to understand what kind of technology are they filing into. Is this an incremental innovation? Is this something where you are already having a patent? Now, once you understand that area, once you understand that this is a patent which actually maps onto something that you are already doing, a product for which you already have a patent, a product that is still in development, but you have a patent for that, and the other party is actually trying to get a patent in that. So once we have all these kind of information from the patent data, and then this is a very easy to get data. All it needs is a simple keywords in Google Patents and some analysis on your part. And then being an industry expert, who is better than to actually analyze your own patents and the patents that talk about technologies which is very similar to you. So once that is done, you have a thorough understanding of what somebody who is a large player or a small player or a medium player is trying to do in a technology which is similar to you. And then this gives you a pretty good idea as to what portfolio of your patents can be licensed to them based on their recent activity, new filings, so on and so forth. So I think this is one of the easier ways which can, again, as Deepak mentioned last time, even utilizing 2 to 3 hours per week can give you a good idea, and in fact a lot of potential licensees that can be used to actually boost up your licensing revenues.
Because I've also seen that, sometimes it is not necessary that you are only looking at the companies in your domain. I think there was one example that we discussed yesterday, which was all about looking at the companies that are not from your domain. And one example that we picked is that if the company like FedEx, which is all into logistic domain, in the logistic domain, it's a kind of piece that I don't want to sue you. I'm not going to license my patent to you and you don't. So it's kind of, very balanced system. But there are other companies which are not in competition to you, but maybe trying to solve the same problem as yours. For example, Domino's. So Domino's is not a logistic company, I say, but they are having the same challenges that FedEx might have already solved, and they may have patents that can solve the problem of Domino's. So if the IP counsel or the licensing manager at FedEx is constantly looking at the companies that have the same problem as their patents, it is much easier to find the licensee, and that licensee who may not give you any friction as well will very openly embrace your technology because there is a need. And I think that is what a lot of us miss, that rather than going to the companies that have a need, we try to go towards the companies that have already solved that problem at their end and they're using the technology. So I think that can give a very quick return rather than a long return, and a time which you have to spend maybe for a year or 2 years. So let's go to the next strategy. And the next strategy is about litigated patents. So I think here we want to talk about that rather than looking at your own patent and looking at the companies around it, which we were talking till now, let's look at completely different plane. That means let's look at laterally. So instead of looking at your patent, if you look at the patents or the cases that are already under litigation, but only those cases that are very closely linked with the technology that you have in hand. So this is something which a lot of SMEs are not aware of. That means they just have their patents and they feel that is what they should know. But if they look at the litigation that are happening and if they identify the patents that are very closely linked with their patent and have been used to sue others, it gives a very instant information to them that who might be needing these patents of ours because they are already under litigation. So, because I know about this because there was one client who specifically asked us that, I don't need to do I don't need you to do any infringement analysis. Just directly tell me which are the patents that are very closely linked with the patent that are in litigation in our domain, and we just want to buy them straight away, or we just want to license them straight away. So it's like a very good defensive strategy for a large company. That means even if you're a small company, this is a very good way to reach out to large company or you can say the defendant, because they would just want to use it for making the case more stronger in here. So a strategy which a lot of companies directly ignore, especially the SMEs. So Vikas, would you like to add any interesting point here?
Sure. Thanks, Deepak. And I think you summed it up very well. But I just wanted to add one point, and that was related to even large filers. Now, I understand that based on my experience working with corporates in various domains, that large companies are not very open to sue because they have some PR strategy or some image to hold to the public, to their shareholders, that they are not an aggressive filer of litigations. Now, in those situations, if they want to gain license out of their portfolio, especially the hot area of their portfolio, which is actually seeing a lot of litigation, and then since they cannot sue directly, so this becomes one of the good strategies where they are actually approaching the defendant and then telling them, hey, look, this is a set of patents that I have. This might be interesting to you considering that you have been involved in a lot of litigations and then you are on the receiving end. We are open to sharing these patents with you via license. So this actually solves a major problem that large companies who are looking to gain revenue out of their portfolios, they don't have to actually go into an aggressive mode and sue companies to actually gain revenues, but rather approach players who are actually suffering from patent litigations and have other woes. They can be approached, and then they can be some very willing players to actually license your portfolio. So I just wanted to add this point. Over to you, Deepak.
Great. And I think some people think that such kind of information is not freely available, but all of this information with respect to patents or the cases is very easily available and to anybody. So for example, the snapshot that we have included is from the RPX website. You can just go over there. You can use keywords to look at the cases that are there in your domain. So it's pretty easy. All of it, what we're talking about, is something for which you don't need to buy any database, or you don't need to pay anybody. You just need to spend a little bit hours of your time, and sometimes you can put alerts. For example, these kind of interfaces provide alerts. That means whenever a new case is going to happen, you will get you will be informed. And sometimes it also gives you a very good idea that if a particular case in your industry has led to a multi-million-dollar damage suit, or it resulted into which the defendant have to pay, it also indirectly can give you a lot of confidence that yes, there are people who have to spend a lot of money on such kind of activity. That means they would be very open to license the patents and pay much lesser as compared to going into litigation. So very good way, very easy way to identify potential licensees. Now, let's move over a little bit to a direction rather than looking at the litigations or the citations. Let's go into a directions about the companies that want to enter into your area and have recently filing patents in your domain. So, Vikas, what is this chart that you have put in here? What we can get to know, and how people can do such kind of thing themselves, because it appears that this is something for which you have to do a lot of analytics.
Sure. So Deepak, this is a very simple chart. All it shows is a plot of the density of patents for players who have just started filing in the last 5 years. So, I mean, we have just termed it as emerging assignees. They can be large players, they can be small players, they can be universities. Now, the idea is to pick among these, say for example, if we have a large player like General Electric, who has been filing in the last 5 years, not very consistently, but they appear to be one of the emerging players, and this is a domain related to 3D printing. Now, we can see that if I have a patent in 3D printing, I can see who can be the potential interested buyers for my portfolios. So in this way, I can identify even large players or small players whom I can license my portfolio based, since I see that they have taken a keen interest, they have started filing, they don't have a very large portfolio, and it's an easy way to get a granted patent for them rather than waiting for 3 to 4 years and then getting a patent granted. That too with a modified scope, depending upon the prosecution or the examination that takes place on that filed application. So an easy way to get a patent for General Electric, and an easy way for you to actually get your patent licensed or gain revenues from that.
So I think that what I know is that if you talk about 3D printing domain, there are more of small companies in that domain rather than a lot of large companies, because there were a lot of small companies who started working on 3D printing domain around 2011 and 2012. And they would have been much ahead of the large players, not in terms of the market size, but definitely in terms of some things that they have already resolved and might have filed patents. So that means that if there are companies of that type, this kind of chart or analysis can give them a very quick idea about who is trying to enter in that area and how you can reach out to them. For example, I can see that why General Electric might be interested in entering into 3D, because every big company is trying to enter into that area. And it would be the same in your domain also. If you are, you are a type of, you belong to such an industry which is very recent, because large companies are always late into that thing. So this gives a very quick idea, I think, that how to identify. Because what I believe is that this could be very useful for the universities, because I've seen that they are the one who are always looking for the companies as a reason to approach. And I think since they have a technology transfer office, that means not just licensing the patents, but also sharing with them how you can develop the technology faster. So I think this kind of analysis could be very, very useful for them. Great. So I think let's move to the next part. So this is also about emerging assignees. So how is it similar regards to the one that we saw last slide, or here there's something else that you want to talk about?
So Deepak, this is just a detailed version of the chart that we were showing in the previous slide. Here what we have done is we have actually divided the technology based on the patent portfolio that I have. So for example, I have a patent related to indoor positioning and navigation, related to Bluetooth, personal area network related to Bluetooth, or wearable devices. So based on that, I have done an analysis of which could be the emerging assignees here. And then based on that, I can actually approach directly to these players for licensing of the portfolios that I have. So for example, here you can see in this slide that Internet of Things, as we all understand, is something that is predicted to be a technology of the future. And there are very less patents by larger players or emerging assignees that we can see here in this slide. If I have a portfolio related to Internet of Things in Bluetooth devices or in Bluetooth technology, I am at a very big advantage, because these technologies would be potential candidates for being acquired by Apple or somebody like General Motors. So I think this is an easy method, although it appears to be a bit complicated, but it is a rather very easy method by just analyzing the patents in your domain related to your interest areas, looking at who has less patents, and then approaching them. As simple as that.
Great. I think this strategy could also be very useful for large companies who generally want to, who have a dedicated department only for licensing. If they can just track this over the period of time, I think they can see how the numbers are changing every month, and they can see that how this 0 is becoming 1, or how the 0 becoming 10, and you can also track that if suddenly it becomes 0 to 10, did they acquire a group of patent, or they filed themselves? So I think that also gives a very good idea that if suddenly it became 10 and they acquired from another group, it is highly likely that they would be open to acquire your patents also, or license your patent as well. So a lot of very interesting things can be done from this kind of matrix. Moving forward, here is a next strategy. So I think the next strategy here that we are talking about is tracking the patents that are getting rejected due to your patent. I mean, this is something which is a little bit weird, that rather than tracking your own patent, you are tracking the patents which are getting rejected because of your patent. So, because what can someone do out of this, information?
That's an interesting question, Deepak, and has a very simple answer. So, for example, if I look at the slide that is in front of me, I see that a patent by the inventor Nyforce Ebe has been used to actually invalidate another patent which has been filed. And then this is an international search report. They are mentioning that this patent has been used to actually overcome the claims of the filed patent. Now, what I see here is that if somebody is trying to get an invention which is very similar to me, and then how did I come to this conclusion? I came to this conclusion because my patent is being used to actually invalidate, or rather overcome, the invention of the filer. So that means that somebody is interested to actually get into a technology for which I already have a patent. Now, this is kind of a shortcut to actually identify most relevant players who would be interested in licensing my patent. So that's the idea behind actually tracking patents that are being rejected due to my own patent or your own patent. So
Okay, so this means that if I have a patent and because of my patent, Microsoft patent gets rejected, that means the examiner at the patent office during his search, he finds my patent and use it to say to Microsoft that I cannot grant your patent because somebody else has already done it in past. So that means that because Microsoft patent got rejected, they were trying to patent the same technology that I own. Am I right, Vikas?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, so that means if I logically connect all of these things together, it means that Microsoft was internally developing the same technology on which I already have a patent, which means that they want that technology. So either they are trying to implement it or they are trying to implement it in near future. In any of those cases, if they are not able to get a patent now because their patents anyway got rejected, I think the chances of them getting interested in my patent is much higher as compared to the other way around. So I think this becomes a very good way of identifying who should I go first, because I don't have to make a case or convince the other person, because if he has already spent a lot of money in drafting and filing a patent, that means that they might be pretty serious about going forward with it. So I think that's a pretty interesting way of tracking and again identifying a need that we talked about earlier, rather than going after the ones who are already resolved or solved that problem. Great. So now going over to the next strategy, and here we are talking about more from the marketing purpose. I think what I mean by marketing is that bringing your technology in front of more and more people, so that if they are building the product and they are facing a difficulty or they're about to launch, they know that there is some technology that is available for licensing, and they can approach you before bringing their product into the market maybe. So because I have visited a lot of product exhibitions, or you can say expos, and I see a lot of stalls over there, and I know that companies put their stalls over there to market their products. Do you mean to say here that rather than products, they should also market their technology or availability of their technology for licensing? Is that what you are sharing here?
In a way, Deepak, yes. And I think you gave a very good introduction on this one. Let me add some more points on this. So people take our licensing, in fact, licensing development teams or our patent development teams, they take a lot of effort and then spend a lot of money to actually socialize their portfolio as, hey, this is a portfolio on, say, for example, open for licensing. Do you want to have a look at it? Now, there are a lot of ways in which it can be done, but I believe the best way is to chase where the money trail is, or choose the right kind of audience. For example, if I have a set of 10 patents that I want to actually get a license on, what I can do, I can choose the best platform for exhibiting those patents. And then what is the best platform? A platform like, say, for example, if I'm in mobile domain, so Mobile World Congress is a very good gathering of all the interested people or potentially interested people who can actually look at my portfolio and say, hey, this looks to be interesting. Now, I don't have to actually shift through thousands of names and then come up with, say, 10 or 20 most interested potential candidates who would like to license my portfolio. I simply put my portfolio on exhibition to a set of audience who is actually interested in that technology area. So in this manner, I can keep an eye on what could be interesting conferences or seminars or talks where people who are like-minded people who are working in the same technology make regular appearances, and maybe I can exhibit my portfolio there. It's definite to catch an eye. So the difference between all the strategies that we have talked about prior to this was that each of the previous strategies that we mentioned, or the hacks that we mentioned, or some kind of shortcuts that we mentioned, required some bit of active participation in researching about the portfolio, in researching about the competitors, in researching about emerging assignees, researching about patents that are getting rejected due to your own patent. But this is more from a strategy perspective as to how to place your portfolio for the right audience or for the right viewing.
So I think here, because what we are saying, we're trying to say is that all the previous strategies were more about outbound. That means you approaching others and telling them that, I have something interesting. And I think this is more about inbound. That means you are letting others reach out to you because you are just telling them that how good technology that you own. So I think this is much interesting. And I don't think that you have to specifically spend money to put to go to these exhibitions. If you are already there, showcasing your products, you can just have this additional information available that, we also have the patent open to licensing it to the, to everyone. So I think pretty interesting. So now moving over to the next one, it is about patent auction sites and marketplace. So because, I'm always pretty apprehensive. I've heard that a lot about these auction sites. I know that Ocean Tomo was there where people can go and say that I want to sell this patent or I want to license these patents. But all of these, there are a lot of such kind of platforms that keep on coming and going. You have mentioned about IAM this right now. I think this is a new platform that has recently emerged in the last 1 year. Because do you think that it is actually very useful? Do you have any personal experience working with few clients who have got some good leads from such a platform, where people have come to them and said that we want to license your portfolio?
So I had my reservations about patent auction sites and marketplace. Although based on the stories that I've heard from some of the clients that I was working with, a specific large corporate who was into the camera and imaging technology, they appear to have gained a lot of interested calls from potential buyers saying that, hey, we are interested in this technology. But there are also cases where I have heard that patents that they were expecting to be least people to be interested in appear to be a point of interest for many guys. So there could be surprising results if we are using patent auction sites and marketplace. Again, it's a passive form of marketing where you say to the world, hey, this is there, and you also open it up so that you also get to know about the value of your portfolio. So there is a hidden factor of getting an insight into what is the value of your portfolio based on the inbound leads that you are getting. So those two things appear to be the major takeaways from marketplaces like IAM. But I believe, yes, they have been useful to large corporates. For small players, I don't know. I mean, there is some factors like credibility of the patent portfolio, so on and so forth, that might be associated. But in general, from the large corporates, I have heard positive responses about marketplaces. So this can be a good idea if you believe you have a good portfolio, and you should definitely put it up on marketplaces like this.
And I think there's a big demarcation here. There are few marketplaces which are paid. That means you have to pay them to host your patents, and there are few which are free as well. So it's not necessary that you should directly go to the paid ones, as we're talking about all the hacks here, not something where you have to pay money. So you can also explore the marketplace where you can just list the patents, and they will take it to expose it to a lot of different buyers or licensors. So that's also can be done. So moving over to the next strategy, and this appears to be a little bit unusual than what we have talked about till now. Innovation Day, because what is Innovation Day?
Sure. So if I talk about conventional Innovation Day, it is more like throwing in ideas that appear to take a lot of time if implemented in a regular way. But if there is a collection of experts and individuals and employees and inventors getting together on a single day and putting in all their efforts on solving those kind of problems, that may be very helpful in future. That's generally termed as Innovation Day. Now, if you believe that you have a good portfolio, you may simply put this as a challenge during your Innovation Day, that I want to license or gain revenue out of my portfolio, or this is a portfolio which consists of X, Y, Z technology. Who do you think, or what could be the best method to actually take this step forward and then put this portfolio into motion for licensing or revenue generation? So that can be one strategy where you can utilize the expertise of your employees and without taking much time, and then this can be done. And in fact, a very similar concept related to this is used by public agencies. Again, because of being funded by public money, they are not open to actually going for aggressive litigation. So in these cases, what they do is they actually set up competitions revolving around their inventions. So for example, one of the cases that I remember is that European Space Agency, they had a patent in 3D printing, and that was specifically designed around aerospace applications. What they put up as a challenge was, that how to use the invention that was there with the European Space Authority in automotive and heavy industry sectors. And you will be surprised that they got a lot of solutions from budding minds, university graduates, people who are looking to start their own business, just for a meager sum of award money. And in fact, they got a process made, ready-made for them with all the research already done, which can be used to actually take that invention forward and then gain revenue out of that, and then get licenses out of that.
This is pretty interesting, because I think we should also do an innovation day internally where we throw one challenge that how we can do something in a better way, and a lot of people just sharing their ideas on one particular day. I think what the examples that you gave, I think what companies are doing is that they are trying to leverage the knowledge that is already there with their employees and using it for their benefit. Pretty interesting, I think, and easy to implement, again, and no money required that are there. So moving over to the next strategy, I think I can see a lot of questions coming in. I would suggest people to just hold on. I think we are going to answer all of them in the end, but you can keep the questions pouring in. We are going to take all of them in the end. So I think coming over to the next strategy, which is about leveraging the inventor community. So because it is similar to the one that we talk about, inventor community means if you have researcher within your company, you try to leverage their knowledge, or what do you mean by internal and external?
Okay, so Deepak, this is a slightly different concept from the one that I talked about in the previous slide related to Innovation Day. This is more about if you have certain inventors who are prolifically inventing in a technology area, and those are some of the patents that you had in mind for licensing. Why do you want to spend so much money on hiring consultants and outside parties, third parties, to actually look into those patents, do an analysis of those patents, find out who are the potential players who could be candidates for licensing, and so on and so forth? Why not simply identify these star inventors based on a mapping? So for example, on the screen, you can see that this is a mapping of the Apple portfolio, and I can see Steve Jobs as being one of the major inventors, but there are others. So Apple appears to be an inventor-centric company, but you can do this exercise for your own company, identify the prolific inventors, and tell them, hey, if I want to sell this patent, or if I want to license this patent to somebody, what do you think would be a good candidate, or who do you think could be a good candidate? So again, leveraging the internal knowledge by identifying the star inventors is something that can be. So this is the internal factor in the slide. And the external one is that there are a lot of platforms, discussion platforms, forums, where like-minded inventors, researchers talk in general about different concepts. You can pose in a challenge to them saying that, hey, this is the technology that I have. I have looked at XYZ markets. I don't believe that apart from, say, ABC players, there are other players. You will see, and then you will be surprised at how many answers and insights come to you, which can be used in your licensing program. So this is related to leveraging the inventor, whether it is an internal or an external.
Yeah, I think now I can relate to Vikas, because I've seen a lot of companies like 3M hosting competition on their website and saying that it is open to all the researchers in that industry. Even they send the brochures and pamphlet to universities, to all the PhDs, to different companies, just to make them aware. And they pay money also. I think that is all because they can get to know about new ideas that internally they cannot leverage. I think pretty interesting way to leverage the knowledge for your own benefit, I would say. So I think we are coming to one of the last strategy, which is about leveraging the vendor network. We covered this particular thing very briefly. I talked about it, but I think because you are specifically talking about Asian players here, I don't understand why you have brought on Asian players. So, for example, if I am a European company, you mean that still I should look for Asian players?
Okay, so Deepak, this was based on my experience that a lot of Asian players are actually looking for market entry into US and Europe. But of course, I mean, this holds for anybody who is trying to enter a new market. But in general, the crux of this slide is that there are a lot of vendors that you're working with, and they have certain technologies that you might need, and then you have certain technologies that they might need. So cross licensing, like the deal between Lenovo and Microsoft, is something that can be useful, which in long term can give you a lot of indirect revenues, but in short term also can give you good revenues. If you have some patents that the vendor is in need of and is working with you, and he or she needs these patents to actually continue functioning, they would definitely want to license your patents. One of the good ways is to actually look at the products or services being provided by the vendors, try to map it onto the relevant portion of your portfolio, and then maybe give a proposal that, hey, these are some of the patents that I believe might be useful to you. Are you open to actually licensing them, or do you have some patents in return which can be used in cross-licensing types? So this is something that I believe can be a very useful strategy to gain revenues from close-by sources rather than by looking into multiple sources for revenues.
So basically, I think you're talking about looking at in a lateral way about those people which are vulnerable. And I think if there is an Asian player which are entering into the market, they are vulnerable and they may face a big lawsuits from large players, and they want to build some defensive mechanism, so they would be open to licensing. And I think this was the same strategy, something similar, which is about vulnerability. Identify the companies which are vulnerable, which we were trying to share in terms of identifying the companies which are already on litigation, and you go to the defendant and you can say that, would you be interested? So I think that was an interesting way to approach a completely different set of players. So I think we covered a lot of strategies today. We are running out of time. I think we took more time than we anticipated, and people are still, waiting from the start. So I think let's quickly jump over to some of the questions and see, if we can answer a couple of them before we close down for today. So I think we have only 5 minutes left, and let's try to answer a few questions within the 5 minutes. So I think the first question is from Michael, and he wants to know that if there are any benefits if so can you share the benefit if others of the pool are not working but only give the patents? What is your experience? So Michael, I'm not sure if I get your question here. I think if you want to ask that, what is the benefit of pool not working? Because can you make, can you share your idea about?
Sure, Deepak. And Michael, if I understand you correctly, you are mentioning that other players in your pool are not working, but you are, and there is a pool. They have just contributed using their patents. What is the general experience? So actually, there is a sharing model, or there is a person who is responsible for governing the pool. Now, the sharing model is in the terms that if somebody has provided their patents, and then based on the ratio of the patents or the proportion of the patents that they have contributed to the pool, they will be disbursed the licensing revenue. So that is one factor. If somebody is not working and he has contributed with say only 1 or 2 patents, and their importance to the pool is auxiliary, then they'll be paid in kind. But if they're not working, I think the best way is to provide the management of the pool to a third party and pay them on so that these kind of issues where you are working and somebody else is not working, but they are reaping the benefits of the licensing can be solved neutrally. So I believe, I mean, based on my understanding of your question, I hope this answers it. But in case the question is a bit different, you can write to us and we'll reply on email.
Quickly moving over to the next question. I think next question is from Amardeep. He's asking that, is it a good monetization strategy to simultaneously acquire more patents, possibly around your existing patents? And I think the answer is absolutely yes, because what a lot of companies, when they acquire the patents, one strategy is look at the patents where they do not have enough protection. A very good example is, the one that we have in front of us. Asian players, if they do not have a very good protection, they're going to buy it. But there is another strategy where what companies do is that they try to become more and more strong in the area where they already are very good or they have a good coverage, because they want to make a monopoly, which is a kind of, we are not saying pool, because pool is more of when you combine the patents of the different companies as well. But here it is about, if you have gaps within your portfolio, that means you have patents, but they can be designed around. So if they can be designed around, is it as good as not having them, because the competitor can get away from your patent? So a lot of companies try to fill those gaps by buying more patents that are related to their existing patents, and they can become more stronger, or if whether it is from a defensive perspective or from the offensive perspective, so from both angles. So the answer is yes, but it very much depends on your business strategy. That means if you have a lot of money or not. So because, why do you have any specific experience related to this?
Yeah, Deepak. So I just wanted to add one relevant point here, and that is that sometimes the patents that you have are not ballistic enough to be sold or to be licensed. In those cases, bundling those patents with some good patents actually creates a good revenue for you. So for example, if you have 10 patents which are not worthy of interest from the potential buyer or licensees, you can add an 11th or 12th patent there, and such that the value of the portfolio as a whole increases. So for example, 10 patents, if nobody is interested in that, I consider the value of the patent to be zero, apart from defensive purposes and so on. So I'm just talking about revenue portion. So if you have 10 patents in which nobody is interested in, which are related to, say, for example, location-based services. But if you add an 11th patent by acquiring some which you believe was already in litigation, which was successful in litigation, or which you believe will be good for litigation, or is a strong patent, you acquire that, you bundle the rest of the 10 patents with those, and hey, if you are, say, for example, getting 100,000 for one patent, now you'll be getting 115,000 for 11 patents, and you have a profit of 50,000 for the 10 patents which were being sold, which were not at all being interested in by the other potential customers. So bundling of patents is a good idea. Planning a monetization program surrounding a thicket of patents as compared to individual patents or a set of patents in which nobody is interested is absolutely not a good idea.
Thank you very much, Vikas. I think we have reached our time, and though we want to answer a few other questions, but I think we will, we will take them offline. So what I mean is that maybe sharing with you over the email. So thank you very much for joining in, and hope you are also there tomorrow. I think tomorrow's session is more about the attorneys, but it would be very interesting because I know that some of the top attorneys in the United States are using that strategy. So really looking forward to sharing with all the other law firm community. Thank you very much. See you then. Bye-bye.